Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for Next and WinMagic's speed webinar series titled Managing Security and Risk in a Small and Mid-Sized Enterprise. I'd like to thank you all for coming, as well as thank the entire panel for coming and joining us today. I have a few logistics to go through before we begin. Today we'll be recording today's webinar, and the link will be shared with you in an email tomorrow. As well, we will be running for about 25 minutes, followed by a Q&A session for about 5 minutes. Please submit your questions via the Q&A box below. And we will also have some polls for you today. Please feel free to fill those out. Finally, at the end, we will have a brief survey that will appear, and please take time to fill this in, as it allows us to improve our webinar content so you as the audience can be better off as a result. And finally, I'd like to welcome Rahul Kumar, our Vice President of Sales and Marketing here at WinMagic. He has kindly volunteered to moderate today's panel, and I'll pass it off to him.
Thank you, Graham. And good morning, good afternoon, wherever you guys are. Thank you for joining us. We are happy to have you here and host you on this webinar. I'm hoping that you find this interesting. We'll be talking about managing risks in your enterprises, small and mid-sized enterprises here. So let me start off with the introductions of the panelists. We have Gary McCracken, who is our CISO and VP of Technology. He's a CISSP with significant experience in the IT security world. And I'll leave it at that. He will talk more as we go along. We also have Mike. We wanted to bring in a perspective while Gary is from the security side of things. We have Mike, who's our CFO and VP of Finance, with over 20 years of experience here, working in multiple vendors. So he's here. He'll give us some kind of a perspective on how do people in finance and how do CFOs think. We also have Hassan Zeri, who is our IT manager, and again with more than 20 years of experience here managing enterprise IT environments. He's our in-house expert on all IT management deployment, right? So it'll be good to get some perspective from Hassan as well. So let's dig in, and with I think with the three of them, we have over 65 years of experience here. So I'm sure this will be fruitful. So let's get in. So let me start off with Mike, you first. Small and mid-sized organizations often don't have enough budgets, and with you first, because this is about budgets, or even a bandwidth to have full-time CISO or security apparatus. So how do companies in that kind of a scenario manage, or how do they look at IT risk from an approach standpoint?
Yeah, thanks, Rahul. Yeah, I hear this a lot. I mean, it's been my experience that most, if not all, small business and medium-sized businesses find themselves in this situation, without having a dedicated security apparatus. What we found is the key to share. We have to share that responsibility among the key stakeholders. In many cases, there's one IT person, so you just can't let this important, task fall to the IT department alone. So, in our experience, you need to take a pragmatic, risk-based approach that's not too expensive. We've found that you really need to do 4 things right to make this work. I think the first one is to set up a committee in your company of no more than 5 or 6 people, that has members from the majority of the business, that that committee is given a mandate. That mandate is to manage the company's security posture. The company needs to have the authority to say yes or no to investments based on their security implications. But the objective is to greenlight all projects, but only once the security aspects have been considered. They don't want to eliminate all risk. Again, you need to be pragmatic, but you need to have the business identify all the applications that are most important and address the weaknesses within those systems before you move on to other things. The second thing that you need to do is ensure all employees undergo some sort of security awareness training. The human factor is always a big issue. And if you can get your security awareness level up, that'll help a lot. And that's also, you can buy a lot of this training online, and it's not that expensive either. The third thing you need to consider is looking at background checks. Again, it's the human element. You may want to even do that with your existing workforce if it's not done already. This also doesn't have to be expensive. And probably the last thing you should do is take advantage of third-party vendor risk management services. We use BetSite, for example, and that can independently, continuously look at your company's external web presence for weaknesses and give you know where you sit in your industry, how well you're doing, and it'll give you updates to any incidents or any risk before any instances occur. So that's about all I have to say. Gary, do you want to add anything?
Gary, you're on mute, so maybe you want to.
There we go. Thanks. I'll just reinforce one of the points that Mike made here. Well, he mentions the security committee oversees the company's security posture. We formed our security committee about 10 years ago, and Mike and Hassan and I have been members since the beginning. But we have technical, legal, customer facing. The whole point is to get marketing and sales. The whole point is to get people represented from different parts of the company, so we don't come up with rules and regulations that aren't implementable. But the bottom line, the most important thing we do is that we're enablers. When a line of business or department comes to us and says they want to bring up a new information system, it's our job to find a way to say yes, not to say no because it's too risky, but find a way that we can make it safe enough that we can say yes, so the business can get on to doing what it needs to do.
Thanks, Gary, and that's insightful. Find a way to say yes. So let's dig in more, and maybe let's start with a poll here. We have a poll. Graham, do you want to put up the poll for us to go through? Yep. So we'll have the next 45 seconds for you to answer the poll. The poll is about how concerned are you about business email compromise? Something that all of us here are more than often right now, more than all of us like to. So let's get your feedback in here, and then we dig into the next steps or the next questions on the conversation here. Mm-hmm. Can I vote? No, it says hosts and panelists can vote, so not me, for sure. Okay. Okay, I'll let Graham tell us when the 45 seconds are over. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so I'm seeing here in fact, close to 65%, 64% of you find it very or extremely, you guys are extremely or very concerned about business email compromise. And I think it's good to be concerned because of the fact that this is very, very prominent these days. So FBI crime report FBI did a very recent crime report, which was published yesterday, said the average size of these crimes is $90,000. Again in the US. So this is average per victim. And also said 75% of enterprises, organizations experience some form of business email compromise. So that is, I mean, there cannot be anything more real than that. Now, we talked about business email compromise. But what is it, Gary? Do you want to elaborate on it, and why are we talking about business email compromise here?
So yes, business email compromise. Let me just quote or the definition from that FBI report. The scam is frequently carried out when a subject compromises legitimate business email accounts through social engineering or computer intrusion techniques to conduct unauthorized transfers of funds. So for example, you receive an email from a legitimate email address, and it asks you to deposit the funds in a different bank account or wire them to a different place than you normally would. And amazingly enough, that is a really big and popular crime. And as I said, the keywords are legitimate, business accounts, because I think people are sort of catching on that if it's not a legitimate account, that you wouldn't act on it. Now, when it's legitimate, it's much harder. So we use Office 365 and Outlook, and had also been very concerned about the potential. So quite a while back, we looked at what we could do, because we were open to having our credentials phished or stolen or social engineering or man-in-the-middle attacks. And there's a couple things we looked at. One was to move to a two-step MFA. That's where you have a password and then some kind of security key or one-time password. Let's say it's one-time password, or passwordless login. And so we decided to pass on the one-time password. Well, first of all, it's an extra step, but one-time password can be attacked with man-in-the-middle attacks too. So we switched straight to a passwordless. And what we used is decided to go with FIDO. With the FIDO, it doesn't require you to type with Outlook in particular. It doesn't require you to enter your Active Directory password at all. And as importantly, it also has anti-phishing built right in FIDO. The protocol has anti-phishing built right into the protocol, so it's not susceptible to these man-in-the-middle attacks that many of these other MFA types are. So with this FIDO, and we decided, of course, we used our SecureDoc Passwordless Authentication FIDO certified security key for this purpose. But with this FIDO key, we got a better user experience and we're more secure. Now, that's not the only thing we did. Mike said, in his 4 points that said what a company needs to do, a security committee needs to do. You have to look at things more holistically. So we also looked at other mitigations. We looked at how we could configure Outlook. For instance, we turned off auto forwarding outside of the domain because that's something that's used by these attacks. We added out-of-band verification. Like if it's a really large sum of money, don't act on it unless you get a phone call or something. And security awareness training. That's the last line of defense. The user is the last line of defense. So they need to have the skills to detect when something seems off. So all those things together put us in a I don't want to say overly confident, but in a confident shape when it comes to business email compromise.
Thanks, Gary. And there are a lot of pieces of information in there. So let's break this down and have it in more bite-sized pieces. So let me ask Hassan. You are the one who is responsible for deploying the SecureDoc Passwordless Authentication FIDO security key. So how does it, as an IT manager, make your job easy?
Hi, Rahul. So business email compromise is a major concern for our organization. So I think we can agree that complex password policies have failed to protect organizations. And I think it's partly because remembering and managing complex passwords is so difficult, especially now that we have so many passwords to remember, both from a organization perspective and for personal accounts as well. So users are left to resort to writing down passwords, and then they leave themselves open to credential theft. In this kind of environment, I think FIDO is one of those rare technologies that is a definite improvement, both from the security, ease of deployment, and ease of use perspectives. And for WinMagic, deploying and enrolling SecureDoc Passwordless Authentication has improved both the security posture and user experience of our staff and of our users and our IT staff.
Thank you, Hassan. So let me ask you a follow-up question here. As a consumer of these technologies, or not even a consumer, but as a customer of these technologies and your employees like us being consumers of it, what factors do you look for in a solution before you make that decision? You're on mute, Hassan. Sorry about that. Hassan, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So many considerations enter into that equation. So we want to look at not just core functionality, but also user experience and ease of use. And we want to look at deployment experience, both from a user perspective, as well as for our IT staff, and supportability, of course. And lastly, we want to minimize cost while we also fulfill our requirements so that we get the best bang for the buck. When WinMagic went to deploy our secure.password solution to replace our old mobile phone app-based solution, we found that we were able to simplify and streamline our deployment process. We actually simplified our user documentation and our documentation for our IT staff as well. And now our users no longer have to go back and forth between their mobile phones and computers. They just get the prompt to enter their FIDO PIN. And when they go to log in, are able to log in without having to enter their password. On top of that, we don't have a fleet of mobile phones to manage. So that's one less device per user that our IT team has to support.
Thank you, Hassan. So Mike, how does the CFO think? This is good from an IT perspective, but how do you think about this?
Yeah, it's when I sit and look at the investments that come in, you always think of return on investment. And when you're trying to sell to your management on improving your security posture by implementing some of these solutions like passwordless authentication or encryption, sometimes you can have a bit of a difficulty explaining that ROI, because this is really a kind of a risk reduction initiative more than anything. So what I try and do is look at it as if you're selling an insurance policy, and that usually helps you to get your management team in line, to get them thinking about risk reduction rather than trying to put a number on it specifically. The other thing that helps, in these solutions is if you consider purchasing subscription-based solutions rather than spending, a lot of bucks up front with the purchase of a perpetual software license. That's been the traditional way that software has been sold, but subscription can really kind of mitigate the costs, especially at the beginning.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So let me bring back the approach question here. You guys talked about security committee in the beginning. How does it work in practice? Right? Hassan, you want to start there?
Sure. Also, the security committee's mandate is to make sure applications and services can be deployed while minimizing risk to the organization. I think Gary also mentioned this, but the goal is to find ways to say yes, along with with risk mitigations in place to make sure that they're deployed safely. Ultimately, we want to avoid a situation where the policy is too restrictive, and that kind of situation will only result in shadow IT. Our security committee also handles security incidents in the organization and discusses the root causes, as well as adds in a mitigation so that we don't have those incidents again. And our security committee is actually monitoring the COVID-19 pandemic right now and actively advising the organization. One additional function there is to look at current industry security best practices and create security policies, such as our policy of data encryption at rest, which mandates full disk encryptions for all our data, and multi-factor authentication policy, which mandates MFA and passwordless authentication for applications such as Salesforce. Lastly, the security committee provides a forum for different business units to provide feedback on current and proposed security controls that the organization, that we may want to implement, and make sure that these controls do not hinder or impact business processes.
Okay, thank you, Hassan. Gary, do you want to give a perspective from a CISO on this?
Sure. To me, the most important thing that the security committee does is form risk assessments. This allows us to put our or apply our limited resources to the highest risk areas and then get the biggest bang for the buck for what we do. And I've seen the forums and questionnaires that have hundreds of questions and dozens of pages. And as a small, medium-sized enterprise, what we needed was something that was short enough to be sustainable, yet covered all the bases. Previously, in a previous life, I had studied for the auditor's course for BS 7799. Now, probably nobody has ever heard of that, but eventually became ISO 27000, the information security standard, which hopefully most people have heard of. I'm also a big fan of NIST 2. So what I did is I took elements of those and created a simple form to evaluate the status of an information system, but from across the whole scope. And the first thing on that form is we need a data owner. And the data owner has to answer the question, what would be the impact of a loss of information confidentiality, integrity, or availability? And they have to rate each one of those individually as low, medium, or high. Then they have to answer a bunch of simple questions across the scope of the information security system. Policy, personnel, physical, access control, backup, logical controls like MFA and encryption, and we even added a section about privacy that was inspired by GDPR. So with those answers in place, we can look, security committee can look and say, well, what's the probability of a breach? And again, we rate that on confidentiality, integrity, and availability from low, medium, to high. With that information in hand, risk is a function of probability and impact. So we can use a simple formula to calculate a risk on a scale from 1 to 9. 9 being the highest risk level at which we mandate the most rigorous mitigations. And once those mitigations are put in place, we'll do a reevaluation, and that will significantly drop the risk down to something lower, like a 6 or something lower. So again, I think that the most important thing we do is manage the company by risk and risk assessments.
Thanks, Gary. And both you and Hassan did talk about disk encryption here as one of the components there. So why don't we run a quick poll on that? Graham, do you want to run this? Yeah, we'll run this for 20 seconds because we are actually running a bit delayed. We're going longer in the conversation, but essentially want to understand from you what needs to be encrypted amongst the infrastructure listed below. And you may want to check on multiple boxes here, right? In terms of if you believe laptops, desktop servers, all three of them need to be encrypted. Yeah. Okay. So I look at this and I see there is a very heightened need for encryption across, right? 93% of people here really talk about laptops, but 71% for desktop, and again, removal media, similar numbers, and so numbers are very similar. 64% for servers too. So that's good. So Hassan, do you have all of these covered at WinMagic here?
That is a lot of things to cover, but our Secure.Enterprise enterprise server makes it very easy to do. So we're able to view the encryption status of all of our endpoints, and not just of our endpoints, but we can also find out whether data on our servers and VMs is protected. We're also able to view whether data on our IaaS workloads deployed in public clouds is protected. With the SES server, we're able to secure our critical data no matter where it resides or how far it moves. The SES server gives us a single console to track data encryption at rest of our IT assets with simplified visibility and management from a single pane of glass. Best of all, we're able to generate regular reports from the SES server and make them available to our security committee to validate that we comply with our corporate encryption of data at rest policies.
Thank you, Hassan. So let's shift gears here. Gary, you talked about when you were talking, in fact, you talked about the first steps in your passwordless journey when you're talking about BEC, right? So what else have you been doing in terms of rolling out passwordless authentication from a journey standpoint, Hassan, when you talk about passwordless?
Rahul, we have several projects on the go in our journey. I think I already mentioned deploying passwordless for our Office 365. Salesforce has gone on record that beginning February 1st, 2022, Salesforce will begin requiring customers to enable MFA in order to access Salesforce. And that email, SMS, text messages, and phone calls won't be allowed as verification methods. So we're currently switching our Salesforce users to secure passwordless authentication, FIDO certified security key for the second factor. In fact, Michael just turned on MFA for Salesforce last week. Rahul, we're very excited about passwordless. We've had a really smooth process rolling out secured passwordless authentication to our staff and actively look for additional opportunities. Now, whenever our security committee reviews application assessments, often the first question we ask is whether we can use secured passwordless authentication to protect the user credentials.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. That's exciting. The sales team here currently uses the FIDO key on Salesforce, but glad to hear, Mike, you are on the bandwagon as well. How did that go for you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I'm a finance guy. I'm not a technical guy, and so this is a massive test for me to be able to see if I could do this. And so I wanted to put the password solution and configure our Salesforce so that it was the second, method of authentication. So I would have MFA. And at the end of the day, it took me about 7 minutes to get it done. They only really had one question, and that was whether to use the software token or trusted password module or TPM. So I used TPM because the encryption keys are protected by the hardware chip, and it's more secure that way. I really don't think it could have been simpler for a non-technical finance type like me. So I was pretty happy with it.
Thanks, Mike. I can't stop but mention that the sales team took much less than 7 minutes.
Yeah, really.
But Gary, anything else in the works on that front?
Well, I think I want to mention that TPM stands for Trusted Platform Module. That's the name of the chip also. Sorry about that, Mike.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a test on knowing all the acronyms.
I'm the non-technical guy, right?
So yeah, we're working on new stuff too, rolling it out. For years now, I've been using the SafeNet phone authenticator as my second factor authentication for our Cisco VPN. And VPN is one of the first things we went to MFA years ago because it's the keys to the kingdom on the network. So when accessing the VPN from home, I used to have to fumble with my phone, get my SafeNet authenticator out, get a code, and then type that code in on the computer to get into the VPN. So what we did is we went with something called SecureDoc Password Authentication or Certificate Authentication. So it's not FIDO Easy, but it's like FIDO Easy in that it leverages the TPM in the laptop to perform a cryptographic authentication with the Cisco VPN. So the bottom line is I no longer have my phone or my phone apps. That's one less phone app to manage. And I don't need to enter my Active Directory password anymore in to get on the VPN. I just use my FIDO, no, it's not FIDO. I just use my certificate authentication from SecureDoc Passwordless. So I'm really sort of jazzed about that. It's really been pretty easy to use. And the nice thing, the bonus of that whole thing was that I can use the same PIN that I use to get into my VPN now to unlock my Windows screen at the idle timer. So now on a day-to-day basis, I don't enter my Active Directory password anywhere on my computer anymore, and I think that's a big improvement.
Gary, and I think we're really running out of time, but let me pull up the last thing up my sleeve here. Hassan, not all users are the same, right? And everybody has different preferences for user experiences. Can you give me an example of the choices that we offer as IT team that you offer to the users in terms of authentication?
Yes, Rahul. So I think as we discussed, WinMagic uses secured out full disk encryption for endpoints. Most of our users enter the AD password pre-boot to unlock the drive and boot into Windows. But I've had requests from some users for a simpler MFA pre-boot authentication experience that logs them right into Windows without entering their AD password. Some employees just don't have that patience to type in the long, complex password that we mandate. So for these users, we are switching them to TPM mode with SSO into Windows. So the TPM acts as something you have factor for the AD login. This mode only works if the user is in possession of their laptop with the right TPM. Anyway, they can use a simpler 6-character PIN in this mode. This PIN, which is unlike a password, works only on their device. It's secure because SecureDoc software limits the number of guesses, and the TPM anti-hammering at the hardware level rate limits anyone trying to guess the PIN. And with SSO, they're logged directly into their Windows account, simplifying the overall Windows login process.
So thanks, Hasan, and my apologies, everyone. We are really 1 minute over here. So what we will do, and this was an interesting chat. Thank you, everyone, for joining in and listening in. We do have a couple of questions, so I want to take one. And if you guys have a few minutes, let's respect the. Let's go over a bit to respect the question that we have got. So we'll take the top two. The first one says, "Can I use my fingerprint on my device to unlock my FIDO authenticator?" Gary, you want to take that?
Yeah, that's something we've been working on, and I'm actually going to be trying out that here next week, and I think we're going to be able to show to that people, and maybe you talk about that on our April 6th demo.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. So that is good. Again, the next question, and this is the last one I'll take. You guys talk about FIDO. What is FIDO? Hey, you want to explain what FIDO is?
I'll take that one too. So FIDO stands for Fast ID Online. WinMagic's a member of the FIDO Alliance. The FIDO Alliance was founded in 2013 with an objective of reducing the world's reliance on passwords. But what really made a difference in the last few years was the FIDO 2 spec came out 3 years ago. All the big players are on the board, Microsoft, Google, etc. And they've built support for FIDO 2 and passwordless right into the browsers. So this is a big improvement over what's been done in the past in FIDO, and I think it really is sort of on the cusp of the passwordless era.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. And thank you again, everyone, for joining the session. We do appreciate your time, and our sincere apologies for going 3 minutes over. Please feel free to reach out to us, and all the questions that we were not able to take, we'll respond to you guys individually on those questions. As a next step, on April 6th, as Gary mentioned, we will be doing a webinar again, and you should get a link to register on that right after this call today or in the morning tomorrow. Essentially, this will be a demonstration of the technology that we talked about, passwordless authentication and encryption. So we look forward to have you join there and again have a conversation around that. Please feel free to ask questions or send us more. Thank you and have a good day. Bye-bye.